Our community is one that has always taken very, very seriously the Aguna situation. Again, an Aguna is a woman who has been determined the timing is correct, it's irreconcilable differences, it's a marriage which can't be salvaged, and it's been determined, you could say by who and by what process, by whom and by what process, but it's been determined, let's say by a Beis Din, that the get should be given, the Jewish divorce should be given, and the husband refuses to do so. He's a recalcitrant husband. The origin of get, when it comes to the Talmud, when it comes to the Gemara, was men would go off to war, and if they didn't return home and you were unsure whether they were still alive, the woman was chained. She was unable to go on with her life and remarry, because a woman cannot be married to multiple men, and therefore she was not able to continue with her life. And in those times, it wasn't ever imagined that someone would electively, that somebody would choose to torture a woman by putting her in that situation. But tragically, in our time, that's exactly what's happened. I remember during 9/11, and there's a whole book by the Beis Din of America about this, we have still lived through circumstances of questions of, in fact, I just saw a sefer promoted and advertised during Corona, that there are people who died and they weren't identified because they didn't get a proper burial preparation, early times of Corona, and maybe their wives should be Aguna, whatever the case may be. So there are recalcitrant husbands today, which is another way of saying real low-life people who refuse to give their wife a get and to set them free. Now, just because a woman wants to be divorced doesn't make her an Aguna from the moment that she says to her husband, we have irreconcilable differences. Very, very important to state and to clarify that a husband is not always the villain, the husband is not always the devil, that a husband is not always evil, and that just because a woman wants to be divorced, that doesn't mean at that moment she is entitled to be declared or be advocated for as an Aguna. It is reasonable for a husband to say, I'll give the get when the civil divorce, let the two divorces happen simultaneously. It's not obligated. It's more righteous, more noble. No reason the husband should give the get right away and take it off the table. But if he wanted to time it with the giving of the civil, it is reasonable. It is legitimate. And a woman is not an Aguna just because she or others declare her to be. It's a body like a Beis Din who examines and hears the situation and makes that determination. And that's when the community should and needs to respond. And our community has never hesitated. We have had several rallies and we have fought tirelessly and advocated on behalf of several women in that position. And unfortunately, we held dozens of rallies, and only when he passed away last year, Shem Risham Yirkov, only when he passed away last year, Dr. Abisror, was his wife free, despite countless meetings, negotiations, rallies.
Erev Yom Kippur, Rabbi Goldberg, Erev Yom Kippur, you and I spent hours in his office. That was the most powerful experience I've ever had. But
he chose to never meet a grandson rather than free a woman who he was married to for a short time and with whom he had no children. But he's no longer here. It took actually his death, which is one of the two ways that the rabbi said that a woman goes free. But in all the other cases, we've rallied, and it's not only our rallies. We recently, last year, rallied. We rented school buses and brought the children of school to the rally. And our rally definitely brought it to a head. But there was an individual in the community who also met privately with the recalcitrant husband, and he primarily, but a combination, deserves the credit. That afternoon, he gave the get. That afternoon.
Right.
One rally.
Rabbi Brody and I were there.
Involvement.
It's featured on HBO, I believe, right? Big
documentary. Featured on some documentary. Yeah, it was featured on some documentary. And I want to give the credit, not to the rally. I want to give the credit to that individual who stepped up with leadership and got it done. I share that only to say that our community doesn't brush it under the carpet. We don't ignore it. We don't neglect it. And if a woman indeed is an Aguna and has been designated as such from an appropriate and proper source, we do not hesitate to step up and to get involved and to do absolutely everything in our power. And I'll give you one such example right now that we should all get involved. Naftali Eyal Sharabani, who he and his wife have been separated since 2010, so 10 years. He's been refusing to give her a get for 10 years. So how do we know she's an Aguna? Maybe there's another side to the story. Who says he's such a villain? The answer is the Beis Din Tzedek of Kolel Evin HaEzer in Lakewood, New Jersey, issued a Seruf. They issued a document saying that he is a recalcitrant husband, she is an Aguna, and everyone should apply whatever social pressure they can. And there's been a groundswell all over social media and elsewhere, putting tremendous pressure appropriately on Naftali Sharabani, who for 10 years torture. Imagine a woman wants to remarry. She wants to date. She wants companionship.
Move on
she
with
wants
her
to move on
life.
with her life.
Right.
She's entitled to. and this woman is unable to, and to the degree that anybody can, if anybody knows him, Eyal Sharabani, put that pressure, share that post, get that word out. And it's tragic, it's sad. We don't want to air our dirty laundry. And there are people who push back and say, why are you airing dirty laundry? Why would you want to publicize or promote that there are such men? But the answer is, we're not airing dirty laundry. We're actually promoting how the Jewish community is a family, and we step up for one another. And as terrible as this is, we won't rest until the people who deserve their get receive their get. So why did this come up tonight? It came up tonight because in the case of Mr. Naftali Eyal Sharabani, again, if you know him, if you can apply pressure, social pressure, if you can encourage, whatever you can do to help his wife, who for 10 years has been trying to move on with her life. But it also came up because there is a case in our own backyard. And there's a local case of a woman who has a civil divorce, despite what her ex-husband is in some cases saying, has a complete and finalized civil divorce, and who her best faith effort has tried through several means, several rabbanim, several batei din, with marriage counseling, with an attempt at mediation, and all of it has fallen flat. And the Beis Din of America, one of the most reputable batei din outside of Israel, Beis Din of America, who I think issues the most gittin outside of Israel, issued a Seruf against him and said that she is an Aguna. And ORA, the Organization for the Resolution of Agunos, which is a partner of ours and we support and is really a leader in this area, and we long for the day that they can shut their doors and close down because they're not needed. But they have also put him on the wall of recalcitrant husbands. I will tell you, if there's any levity in this, that the website apparently that lists is called Recalcitrant Parties. And when someone sent me the link and I saw that's what it was called, my first reaction was, how wicked, how incredulous are these people? They throw parties? These recalcitrant husbands have parties together? And I was like, these recalcitrant parties? What is the matter with these people? Like, is this Stone V'Amora? They have recalcitrant parties? Anyway, foolish me, they are the recalcitrant parties. So this individual is among them. So some people became aware of this case and they started to promote him as well. And then others have reached out and said, hey, rabbis, where are you? Rabbis, don't you care about a woman in your community? So I want to just share, and I know I've been speaking for a little bit. I appreciate it. And I'll turn it over to you for your thoughts, clarifications, or questions or insights. But I want to share something that's really, really important for our listeners to understand. The goal, every single time, the goal in the case of an Aguna, and again, sometimes the men are in the right and the women are wrong in issues of gittin and custody and divorce. Very important to also state. Not always is the woman the victim and the man the perpetrator. Not always is he the recalcitrant party and the woman is the angel. There are both directions, and it's really important to understand the nuance and to trust the people who are competent involved. Very important to say that. So we have to remember what the goal is. The goal is when there's a woman in Aguna who wants to get and wants to move on, the goal is to get her get. That's the goal. The goal is not to be right. The goal is not to be popular. The goal is not to look like a hero. The goal is not to satisfy some social justice need within ourselves. The goal is to get her get. And I will add, the goal is not only for her to receive her get, the goal is for her to do it without any unintended casualties and consequences like her children. These online campaigns about men that have a permanent imprint and footprint in the digital world are painful for children who one day will Google their father. And if a person can achieve that result without taking that route, it is much, much, much more desired. If there can be conversations, negotiations, efforts, it is much, much more desired, even after she's an Aguna. So a woman's an Aguna, and Ora's taken it up, and they're on the wall of shame. But before there is unleashed a very public campaign locally in the community and far beyond, every effort should be expended because we want to protect the children. We want to protect the woman who doesn't want to be spoken about at Shabbos tables everywhere. That's the nuclear option. It's a last resort. And when I say it's the last resort, it's also the last resort to put pressure on that recalcitrant husband. And when you unload all of your options and you have no point of leverage or incentivizing left, then you have nothing left in order to do it. So for the sake of the woman, that's what has to happen. There's somebody who I admire tremendously, a member of our community with a big, big heart and an enormous moral compass, who is so disturbed by the notion of an Aguna and wonders, an excellent question that maybe some of our listeners have as well. Rabbis have come up with the sale of chametz and the heter iska and the Shabbos elevator and lots of legal loopholes. Why haven't we found a way out and a solution for this? He's so terribly bothered. So when he saw that there's such a woman here, he sent me an email and he resigned his membership from the shul. He said, I can't belong to a shul that has rabbis who do nothing. So of course, when I explained, we speak to this wife in this particular case several times a day. I have testified in court. We have gone, it's not me, the rabbis of our community, our colleagues in Boca Raton, the other rabbis here, Rabbi Gibber, Rabbi Rabovsky, the rabbis have been involved as much, far more than I, every day, several times a day. Of course, when he understood, he obviously walked it back. But the goal is not to unleash the campaign. And I'll end by saying this. When the time is right, because we're still working several avenues, when the time is right, and when the wife, the Aguna in this case, says yes, it's time, unfortunately, tragically, sadly, there are no alternatives. It's trying to go public and put it in the shul bulletins and hang it all over town and put it in the social media and hang it all over where he's from in New Jersey and where his parents and siblings live and put it everywhere. When that time comes, I'll tell you right now, I promise you, as we have before, we will put everything we have into that campaign. The entire world will know that recalcitrant husband's name. They will know his name, they will know his face, and sadly, unfortunately, they will know his family's faces and names, because they are, if they don't encourage and help him to give that get, sadly, then they're part of the problem, not the solution. So that's a promise and a pledge, but it has to be the right timing. The goal here is not to feel right. The goal here is not to shout the loudest. The goal here is not to be the hero. The goal is to get her a get. And if we can do it without ever doing that, then that's the goal. And she doesn't want it. You have to follow the Aguna, the woman who's consulting several experts, several abanim, several other avenues. And when the time is right, we're going to do it. All right. Thank you for giving me that time.
I have a lot to comment in return, but I do want to share a text that I received, and I want to let you respond to that text because I think it's a very important point. And perhaps other people in our community are thinking about it as well. So text me and said, just to be clear, I haven't spoken to him in ages, and I might get slack for saying this, ... There are always two sides to the coin, right? How would you respond to that, Rabbi? People who know him, people who may have heard a narrative, and I'm sure this happens in so many Aguna cases where friends who are in the middle of it, they hear two sides of the story, they know that it's probably more gray than black and white. How do you as a rabbi convince people that this is unequivocally something that is an abuse, something that needs to end, and that even if there might be a little bit of gray there, then you have to err on the side of justice when rabbis and experts are telling you to?
I'm so happy that you raised that because it's really important. There's not two sides to the story. There's 3 or 4 sides to every story. We do marriage counseling and we do mediation and business and we do, and there's his side, there's her side, and then there's the truth. There's definitely multiple sides. But what I think it's important to understand here is that there can be multiple sides to a story in some of the elements of the story, but when there's a fundamental part of the story where there's only one side, we need to focus on that. So am I going to tell you I'm not talking about this particular situation, in any situation, that one side is entirely innocent and did everything right the entire way and bears no guilt? Absolutely not. But I will say is that if you divide and conquer, if you look and recognize and say, just on the Aguna issue, let's say this woman did other things that are wrong. Let's say her parents did things that are wrong or hurtful. Let's say there were mistakes made. But right now, given where we are right now, without the ability to turn back the clock, right? You say to someone, so therefore what? She should live without her get the rest of her life? She should be an Aguna forever and suffer? What justification is there? Sometimes maybe there are justifications. But what justification is there ever to use a get as leverage to extort or exploit using the get? And so you have to narrow in and focus. In this particular case, I can tell you that he has told his friends outright and blatant lies. Now, I promise you that if we get to the point that we need to publicize this, she will be on Behind the Bima. I've already spoken to her. If we get to that point, she will tell her story on Behind the Bima. The whole world will know his name. We will do everything we can. So just like tonight, we are trying to free Chava, and we don't hesitate to mention the name Natalia Eyal Sharbani and to call on anyone who knows him to publicize and to pressure, socially pressure. We'll do the same in this case. We're not there yet. So yes, are there multiple sides to a story? There are multiple sides to components of a story. Like, I don't know, A murders B. So would you say, well, there's 2 sides to the story? Because it turns out that B really made fun of A's mother and really stole money from him and really made him feel bad and insulted him. Yeah, there's multiple sides to the story. There's a lot of background to the story. But if we just focus in on the act of the murder that was so unjustified, that's indefensible, there's only one side to that part of the story. And the same is true with this get. Again, I can't disclose too much, but in this case, he's sharing absolute lies and the evidence is piled up. And the way I know that is not only because I know that firsthand, but a Beis Din examines that. A Beis Din doesn't issue a Seruf. A Beis Din doesn't come to this conclusion without examining and without looking through it. So again, the woman's not always right and the man's not always the perpetrator. One of my friends is texting me right now, there's such a thing as a male Aguna. there's a woman who won't accept a get, and yes, there are men having out of a heter mei rabbanim and other things that can be done. There are men who are tortured by women who do not cooperate, or who in custody and in court torture them. The man's not always the perpetrator, the woman's not always the victim. There are cases that can go both ways, but when a Beis Din has made that, when a reputable Beis Din, that's also important, when a reputable, competent Beis Din has made that determination, that element, there's only one side to the story on that element.